Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series where we take a look at Precon decks and bring them up to cut rate standards. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Explorers of the Deep Precon from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and its face commander, the famed River Herald Scout, Hakbal of the Surging Soul, which we'll be bringing up from its roughly $40 price point to an increased budget of $75 after upgrades. But before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content, and if you really like it, please consider supporting the channel directly, either through Buy Me a Coffee or through our Game Nerds affiliate link in the description. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see which commanders we'll be covering next, and what commanders you'll be voting for to feature on an upcoming episode. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Hakbal of the Surging Soul is a 3/3 merfolk scout that costs 2 and Simic that has the following 2 abilities. Firstly, at the beginning of combat on our turn, each merfolk creature we control explores. And secondly, whenever Hakbal attacks, we may either put a land from our hand onto the battlefield or draw a card. Breaking down his core stats, Hakbal is sporting a mid-weight CMC, a below-average stat block for his cost, and a pair of very Simic-themed abilities that aim to empower merfolk and use them to derive value via Explore, while he himself provides us with consistent ramp and card advantage. Taking a closer look at his first ability, it's a rather simple but nonetheless powerful Tribal Payoff, whose passive AoE Tribal Explore enables all our merfolk to either A. draw into more lands for us, turning them into pseudo card advantage and ensuring we make our land drops for the remainder of the game, or B. empowering those merfolk with +1/+1 counters while they serve as card selection that let us clear dead cards off the top of our deck, making Hakbal an impressive source of value and a way to continually empower his tribe with his mere presence on the battlefield, which only gets better the more merfolk we get into play so we can explore even more. This then works nicely in conjunction with his second ability, which, when Hakbal swings in after we explore, lets us put one of the lands we likely hit off of Explore into play to help speed up our mana base, or, on the off chance we didn't draw into a land or are just low on cards in hand, lets us draw instead to help replenish our resources, essentially making Hakbal the poster child of Simic value by either ramping us or generating us card advantage every time he swings in, which of course is fantastic to have access to from the command zone. So, as we can see based off of his abilities, Hakbal is obviously a merfolk tribal commander and possibly the most Simic commander who ever did Simic, excelling in everything blue-green is traditionally good at, that being +1/+1 counter distribution, ramp, and draw, within what is quite possibly the best supported tribe in those colors, with the only thing required to enable his merfolk value-focused game plan is the critical mass of merfolk needed to take advantage of it. And, luckily for us, the core build excels in this department, providing us with a near-perfect selection of tribe members right out of the box that are built to take advantage of this, ranging from tribal lords and sources of +1/+1 counters to further empower our merfolk alongside Hakbal, tribal payoffs to generate us even more value off of our merfolk, and even in tribe +1/+1 counter payoffs to maximize the mileage we get out of Hakbal's counter distribution, as well as providing excellent non-merfolk support for both the merfolk and +1/+1 counter game plan to enable them even further. In fact, the selection of tribe members in this build is so good, we'll hardly have to make any changes to it at all, freeing up our budget to add in some elite tribe members and honorary tribe members to take advantage of all the value and empowerment the build provides, and more non-tribal ways to empower both the tribal and +1/+1 counter-centric game plan, while still having enough budget left over to overhaul our removal and ramp with the best staples Simic has to offer, leaving us with a final build with so much value and power that it will restore the River Herald Empire to its former glory. So let us make our way deep into the jungles of Ixalan, to the once sacred site of the Deep Root Tree, the River Herald's most sacred temple, or rather, what remains of it. What had once been an ancient mangrove cultivated into a titanic temple for the merfolk race has now been reduced to a polluted swamp. A graveyard littered with the twisted metal bodies of Phyrexian invaders and the countless River Herald defenders who had given their lives to protect it. It is here we will find Hakbal, bearing witness to what could be the twilight of his race, their already diminished numbers having been decimated even further by the Phyrexian invasion, bringing their once mighty race to the very edge of extinction. But even as he witnessed the putrid remains of their once mighty empire, it wasn't sadness that he felt within himself, but steely resolve. No, even with their place of worship destroyed, even with their numbers reduced, they would endure. He had heard word of Pashona, one of their race's surviving shapers, who was seeking the mythical Matzalantli, the home of the gods long forgotten by history, and possibly the key to not only saving their race, but also restoring it to its former glory. So it is there he will go, to join her expedition, lending his decades of experience as a scout to her quest, and, with any luck, rekindle the embers of their dying race. So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's jump straight into the upgrades. So, jumping straight into the new merfolk additions we'll be adding to the build, we'll be mainly focusing our efforts here on building upon the build's already superb selection of tribal lords to empower our wide board states of fish people even further, as well as adding in some tribal tutors so we can fetch up the most powerful of our game plan enabling tribe members whenever we may need them. Starting in the former camp, we'll be cutting Coral Helm Commander, who can eventually turn itself into a tribal lord via level up, but requires far too much of a mana investment to do so, which we could instead be using to cast more merfolk to explore alongside Hakbal, as well as Merfolk Cave Diver, who can theoretically become a massive one-shotting threat as we explore, but loses out here due to us having access to multiple ways to turn any of our merfolks into threats between Hakbal, our lords, and sources of +1/+1 counters, so we'll be giving their spots to Voldalian Hexcatcher and Lord of Atlantis, both of which are cheap tribal lords to help bolster our merfolk stats while we build up our board state with them, while also providing additional upside, either in the form of manaless spell disruption via sacking away our excess merfolk to help keep our board states intact, or by granting us another AoE source of Island Walk to usually give us at least one free attack in any given game to safely trigger Hakbal's ramp or draw. Then in the latter camp, we'll be swapping out the legends Vorl of the Hulklad and Prime Speaker Zagana, the former single target counter doubling not getting too much mileage in this build, since we'll be spreading our +1/+1 counters around, while the latter's board state dependent stats and draw usually end up either being unnecessary on established boards, or completely useless on boards we're behind on, so we'll be swapping in Forerunner of the Heralds and Marrow Harbinger in their place. Their ability to tutor any of our tribe members directly to the top of our deck not only being a fantastic way to improve our build's consistency, but, even more importantly, are critical for bringing up merfolk that can turbocharge Hakbal's Explore granting, such as Nick Hansil Current Conductor, who turns every land we hit off Explore into ramp by putting it into play, and Topography Tracker, who doubles the amount of times we explore to literally double the value encounters Hakbal nets us. And while on the topic of tutors, we'll be adding one additional non-tribal one to the build by axing Solatoyak the Smiling Flood, whose flood counter gimmick is an interesting build around but doesn't do enough to enable our game plan, outside of occasionally triggering Island Walk and making our merfolk pseudo-vigilant, and adding in Sea Hunter, who may not be a merfolk itself, but, for only 3 mana, allows us to repeatedly tutor up any merfolk from our 99 directly into play. Again, allowing us to fetch up our aforementioned game plan enablers, this time directly into play without needing to draw into them, while also letting us cheat our bigger merfolk into play at a considerable discount, freeing up our mana to cast other spells with. Then, as our penultimate new creature addition, we'll be replacing Thassa, God of the Sea, who's a fantastic reprint that sadly doesn't get enough usage here, since the build already has various manaless ways to grant our merfolk evasion, and her passive Scry 1 pales in comparison to the multiple explores Hakbal provides each turn, with Titan of Letjara, which is technically a merfolk thanks to turning into one as it ETBs so it can benefit from our tribal payoffs, and serves as an absolutely fantastic source of repeatable card advantage as it comes down and swings in that scales off the merfolk we have in play, more often than not completely reloading our hands each turn on an established board state. And then as our last piece of direct merfolk support, we'll be sidelining Curse of Swine, which is a serviceable source of removal and, more often than not, a board wipe for us. But since this build is much more concerned about building up and establishing our board rather than demolishing our opponents, we'll be giving it spot to Deeproot Pilgrimage, which not only passively creates hexproof merfolk tokens for us to build up our board state with as we swing in, but also synergizes exceptionally well with merfolk with tap effects to generate us even more bodies per rotation, particularly Kumina, Tyrant of Araska, who can use his first ability over and over again to tap down all our non-token merfolk to essentially double our tribal body count as soon as he hits the board. Now, with all the new additions to our merfolk game plan covered, let's move on to the changes we'll be making to the build that support Hakbal's passive explore granting, starting on the +1/+1 counter side of things by removing Aetherize, which is too much of a defensive wipe for us to make use of, considering that most of the time our board should be the biggest and have few people willing to attack into it, to add in Ozolith the Shattered Spire, which joins the ranks of the build's already included +1/+1 counter multipliers to help us increase the size of our merfolk even more as they explore alongside our commander. Then, to help us take advantage of all the cards we'll be sending to the bin as we explore, we'll be raising the terrible land Temple of the False God, since we can afford to cut our land base slightly due to our low mana curve, so we can make space for our last creature, Genesis, which helps supplement the build's handful of other ways to get resources back from our graveyard by passively letting us return any creature from our grave back to hand for 3 mana a pop each turn once it's in our bin, which we can easily get there via Explore, and enables us to be a bit more reckless with discarding merfolk to dig for lands off of Explore, since we always have the option to bring our tribe members back later. So, now that we've covered all the primary game plan improving and enabling additions we've made to the build, we'll be using the remainder of our budget to overhaul the base build's ramp, removal, and land base to make it as efficient as possible to work alongside our merfolk. So, starting with the upgrades we'll be making to our ramp package, we'll begin by cutting the cantripping extra land drop Explore and the mana rock Simic Signet in favor of the staple land ramp sources Rampant Growth and Cultivate, both of which serve as more reliable sources of ramp to help ensure we can consistently get to Hakbal in the early game to get our game plan off of the ground, and scrapping the generic mana rock Commander Sphere to bring in Thought Vessel, which gives us access to another way to remove our maximum hand size limit, so we don't waste the resources that our commander or other sources of card advantage generate by being forced to discard, while also speeding up our mana base by virtue of being a 2-drop mana rock. And then as our last new piece of ramp, we'll be removing Sage of Fables, whose ability to turn our +1/+1 counters into draw is okay, but we already have plenty of passive sources of draw that don't require mana or counters to function, in order to make space for Court of Bounty, which still provides card advantage by making us the monarch when it comes down, and, more importantly, either allows us to put an extra land into play on our upkeep to make use of all the lands we'll be drawing off of Explore, or, if we're able to hold on to the crown for a full rotation, gives us the option to put a creature into play instead, which of course is fantastic to help us build up our board state with additional tribe members at no mana cost. Then pivoting to the refinements we'll be making to our removal package, we'll be slotting out Raven Form and Ruinous Intrusion, which are decent removal but a bit too expensive for us to use since we want to keep our mana curve low, so we can slot in Pongify and Nature's Claim, both of which are dirt cheap removal to help us cheaply and efficiently deal with our opponent's threats, so we can use the majority of the mana in our build to cast more tribal bodies and ways to enable our primary game plan, as well as scrapping Commit to Memory, which again is too expensive for what amounts to a counterspell that turns into a wheel later, in favor of Simic Charm, which serves as low-cost bounce removal that can alternatively be used as another way for us to protect our board from targeting, ensuring that our key merfolk can survive our opponent's attempts to remove them. And finally, reaching the end of our upgrades, we'll be giving our land base a glow up by terraforming the Bounce Land Simic Growth Chamber, the Scry Land Temple of Mystery, and the Graft Land Lanawa Reborn into the Pain Land Yavimaya Coast, the Filter Land Flooded Grove, and the Slow Land Dreamroot Cascade, all of which provide the build with more untapped fixing to better suit our faster, more aggressive playstyle. So, now that we've covered all 19 cards that we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. This deck currently has 38 creatures including our commander, 9 instants, 5 sorceries, 8 enchantments, 5 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 35 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 35 merfolk or creatures that can turn themselves into merfolk, 4 sources of merfolk tokens, 29 cards that care about merfolk, 13 sources of +1/+1 counters for themselves or others, 13 cards that care about +1/+1 counters, 2 cards that care about exploring specifically, 3 cards that can recur our resources from the grave, and 6 cards that can protect our creatures from targeting and/or destruction, leaving us with a very strong tribal game plan with plenty of tribe members alongside ways to generate value off of them and empower them, a solid +1/+1 counter sub-theme to empower and derive even more value off of our merfolk while we beef up their stats, a decent number of ways to keep them alive for as long as possible, and capping off with a handful of ways to generate additional value off of our commander's explore either by directly empowering it or by letting us reuse the cards we pitch to it. Then for general deck stats, we have 13 ramp sources, 14 card draw sources, 9 targeted removal sources, and 1 board wipe. Our targeted removal being slightly lower than average in this build since we'll be focusing most of our interaction on ways to keep our board intact rather than picking apart our opponents. Looking at our mana curve, we have 6 1-drops, 22 2-drops, 18 3-drops, 12 4-drops, 5 5-drops, 1 6-drop, and 1 7-drop, leaving us with a relatively low-to-the-ground curve that aims to make a beeline for Hakbal as quickly as possible, ideally alongside 1 or 2 cheap merfolk so we can get our Explore game plan rolling. Then from there, we just need to keep building our board with more and more merfolk, generating more value off of them and/or empowering them as they explore, while Hakbal generates us even more value via his ramp and draw as he swings in, accumulating more and more resources and board presence until our opponents are crushed under a wave of ridiculous value and empowered merfolk bodies. The final price of this build then comes out to be $75.26 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $40. The price of most of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording, though for a few of the newer cards still on presale, pricing on Cool Stuff Inc. was used instead. Now, for side grades, we can consider replacing Marrow Harbinger with For the Ancestors, which works better for us if we're interested in getting more merfolk into our hand rather than tutoring up specific merfolk, and a Titan of Letjara can be swapped out for Wonderwine Prophets, which gives us access to a tutorable tribal finisher that, with the right setup, can potentially net us infinite extra turns to close out games with. Then for upgrades, we can replace the tribal payoff Reflections of Letjara with the arguably superior tribal payoff Roaming Throne, which doubles all our merfolk's triggered abilities to get even more value off of them while benefiting from all our tribal payoffs thanks to turning itself into a merfolk. Quandric's command can be replaced with Raise the Palisade, which serves as another one-sided tribal board wipe in this build to help us retake control of the board, or simply get rid of blockers so we can alpha strike in with our horde of buffed up fish people. And Court of Bounty can be exchanged out for Burgeoning, which allows us to take advantage of all the lands we'll be drawing off of Explore to Ramp by netting us 1 to 3 extra land drops per rotation as our opponents make their land drops, and possibly even more if our opponents are using land-based ramp. And of course, because it would be here, since we're in a green deck with lots of creatures that cares about +1/+1 counters, why wouldn't we replace Thought Vessel with the Great Henge? Since the damn thing does everything apart from flipping the table and knocking out our opponents between the draw, counters, ramp, and life gain it generates. So yeah, if you got $40 to burn on a single piece of cardboard, run it, generate all the value, and wonder what WotC was thinking when they printed this abomination. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. So, first things first, now that I've wrapped up the last of the Precon upgrades for Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and with Thanksgiving coming up next week, I'll be taking a 1-week break to rest, relax, and refuel before I get back to covering our backlog commander builds for Sir Ginger the Mealender and Totentan's Swarm Piper. So look forward to me starting coverage on those builds in 2 weeks' time. That said, I will leave you all with a poll before I go, and, as is tradition, it will be featuring all of the alternate commanders from the Precon decks so they can have a shot at a build of their own. Those being the permanent reanimating Carmen Cruel Skymarcher, the Traitor Lord Don Andres the Renegade, the Enrage doubling Waita Trainer Prodigy, and the land flooding Shyla Toyak the Smiling Flood. So please cast your votes before the deadline on November 24th, and let me know in the comments who you voted for, and which commanders from Lost Caverns of Ixalan you want to see me cover in future polls. And lastly, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel can't continue to grow without your support. And if you're feeling particularly generous, feel free to keep me caffeinated via buying me a coffee at the link in the description, or alternatively, use our Game Nerds affiliate link in the description if you're looking to purchase sealed MTG product, accessories, board games, or any of their other wide selection of products at low prices that include free shipping for orders over $75, and a rewards program that builds up store credit over time as you make your purchases. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.